Here we go. Let me know if y'all can't hear this.
What in a cottage cheese? Okay.
I messed up.
You stop too. My turn. Smash that. For God I live, for God I die. For God I live, for God I die. For God I live, for God I die. For God I live, this is no battle. Ha! Ha! Wait, but didn't I defeat you already? Capture that. Round two, no more. Round two, one. Round two, kick, one, two, kick, pick him up, kick, rocks. Put helmet in the boot to the kick. Finish. Finish on that. Ha!
He's so in love with his daughter. You know, you can
Yes.
see it in his eyes, you know, the fact that she has surpassed him in this skill of beatboxing. And she has taken on something that evidently was in one time really important to him. And she has basically, you know, fully embraced it. And I think in a lot of ways, that's one of the key elements about parenting. And what we need to understand as we start to talk about fatherhood and about the things that fathers really mean, and that is part of what we're going to be talking about today, is the importance of fathers. So the very first slide that we have here, which talks about that, and what we see is that children are a reflection of us. They're a reflection of their parents. So you see in Genesis 1, and actually my church has been talking about this for a while, that when God talks about, being able to produce offspring of the same kind. See, your children are a reflection of you. They're just little versions of you, who you marry, who you, pull yourself into, they're going to be a reflection of that, both the good and the bad, unfortunately. And one of the things that God has showed me a long time ago is that, in Proverbs 22, when it says, direct your children onto the right path, when they're older, they won't leave it. Well, actually, in the New King James Version, it doesn't read like that. It just says basically, direct your children in the way that they should go, and they'll never depart from it. See, the way that the way that they go or whatever, because I'm missing the line off the top of my head, but that does not necessarily mean the right path. If you teach your children that basketball is more important than football, they're going to believe that. If you teach your children to drink, they're going to believe that. If you teach your children that smoking is okay, they're going to believe that. Whatever you teach them is what they're going to believe, because your children want to be like you. One of the first things that they do is that they look at their parents and they imitate them. They recognize who's the mommy and they recognize who's the daddy, and they imitate. Okay. In fact, all humans learn more by watching than they do by anything else. So children are a reflection, and we need to understand this, because if we don't, then we, just like with the guy and his daughter, she was a reflection of him. You can see it in every single way. She has surpassed him, yes, but that's what you want your children to do. But you also see within all of that that she is very much her father's daughter. And so that is so, so, so important. So let's get into some ugly facts. And we almost all know these ugly facts before we even get into them. Okay. Children from fatherless homes are more likely to be poor, become involved in drug and alcohol abuse, to drop out of school, and to suffer from health and emotional problems. Okay. So we can look into all of these different facts that I found out here, and I'm sure that any of you go out to Google. You can Google a lot yourself. You could be out there all day looking at how fatherlessness is extremely hard on children. It is not something that people need to look beyond, and I do applaud, women, for being out here, for moms, single moms being out here and, fighting that good fight. This is not, something against them. But what we do need to recognize and we do need to appreciate is the fact of what a father brings, to the mix. Okay. So one of the other things that we need to recognize as well is just this internal. Somebody clicking a lot, so somebody needs to. It's harder for me out here, so I'm just asking everybody to mute because I hear some clicking back and forth. Now, if you guys have something to say, you can unmute and ask me a question. But if not, just trying to keep some of the sound down. Okay, so basically what we can find out here, when it comes to all of these things is, like I said, it's not just a father being around literally, because what we want is the father to be involved within the child, in the child's life. And these father figures are needed for social and emotional support, but they also are needed for support of the mom as well, to give the mom freedom, to give the mom the ability to go out and do things with her friends, so that she is not the sole person and she's not carrying all this weight. This extra weight upon the mother and the child or children causes even more stress for both sides, to go on, when you take away the father. Okay. So I could go through a gabillion things and show you a whole lot of different slides, but I didn't want to get too into the weeds of depression today, or of the main problems of this, because I wanted this to be something that we use as and recognize, something that we recognize about the importance of fathers. This is not something that single moms or moms, like I say, nothing against you all, but even if somebody gets in a marriage and then they decide to get a divorce, they need to think twice before they get a divorce for their children. I was 19 years old when my parents got a divorce, and it hurt even then. It always hurts. It is never a day when it does not hurt the child. The child wants their parents to be together. That is just how it is. Do not listen to the hype. Okay. But at the same time, I understand if you're in an abusive situation or anything like that. But that's also why we study the Enneagram in this group. That's also why we study personality and relationships, stresses, and different things like that to help to not only get into strong relationships, but to stay in those relationships because that is important not only for it's basically important for everybody involved, the mom, the dad, and the children. Okay, so again, you can look at these facts over here, but there is a trend of fatherlessness in America. Okay, there is a trend for, a lot of women to say, oh, I don't need a man. I can raise these children on my own. I can do this. I can do that. But what's happening is you're really hurting your children. Okay, you hurt the father, you hurt the child. And so it's one of those things that's an interconnected situation. And I work with kids, and I've seen it, myself and talked to them, seen it in their eyes. And it's really, a rough, tough thing. But again, this is not to beat up on single moms because everybody has a reason why they were in certain situations. And unfortunately, many times it's the dad that doesn't want to be around. So this again is not to beat up on that, and that's why I didn't want to spend a lot of time going back and forth over these things. But I also don't want us to be blind to them as well. Um, Here's where it starts to get to the interesting stuff for me, at least. Okay, when you start to look at a generational curse, which they talk about in the Bible in Exodus, what you start to really understand is that what many times we think is a very natural thing, God really kind of either created it or he understood what would happen if people do this. Like I am a third generation divorcee. My grandfather got a divorce from his first wife and married my grandmother. My father ended up in a divorce from his wife, and then I ended up in a divorce. Um, Generational curses are just something that many times we happens to us because we lack information or we don't have a true understanding of what placement and how we play this game properly. Um, so one of the things that it was a pastor a long time ago. He had preached a sermon, and that sermon has always stuck out to me. And I never really knew why. But the more I get into this group and we do stuff with this group, it kind of just yells to me at the back of my mind, and that is the concept of standing in the gap. And that was what the this particular pastor was talking about. And he said God is looking for people to stand in the gap, to basically say, you know what, I'm willing to take the pain of all these generational curses upon myself in order to make the generations that come after me better. Because it's a standing in the gap. And, it's people have done this in the past. In fact, this was very much encouraged around the civil rights movement. It was encouraged for a lot of, Black people to forgive quickly, get over it, and to stop with the hate, so that we can move forward. It's been asked for, all different types of stuff. I even had a friend who he got really angry when he found out that his grandfather had abused his grandmother. He was basically physically violent, and she was trying to do this. She was trying to stand in the gap. His great grandmother was trying to stand in the gap because she did not want anybody to understand or see, or her daughters or sons. So what she did was they did their beatings behind closed doors, and she just didn't say anything about it to make sure that her daughters and her children were protected from the understanding of it. And so by the time it got to that generation, they no longer did it because they never knew it even existed. But one of the things that I love about that Michelangelo picture, and the reason why I put it up there, was because it's interesting to me that I think even Michelangelo understood that Adam is basically sitting there and he's almost like, I don't really care to reach towards you, God. But God is reaching with so much force, it is taking angels to hold him back.
Mhm.
And so God wants us to save generations through ourselves. We don't have to necessarily, go out here and try to convert a gabillion people. A lot of times we would just save our own kids. That's enough. Because we have issues and we don't need to try to cover these things up and act like they don't exist. It's one thing to say, like for me, I can't speak for anybody else, but it's one thing for me to say, okay, well, I'm divorced. It's another thing for me to say, you know what, I'm divorced and I'm going to seek help. I'm going to try to find out how I can be a better person so that the woman that I end up with next time, she ends up with a much better man than my first wife did. See, that's a different mentality. It's a mentality of trying to become better, to try to change, and like I said, to try to stand in the gap. Okay, so if we have issues in the past, that's fine, and that's why I said I don't want to beat up on anybody here. Okay, and I'm trying not to beat up on anybody's parent. I'm not trying to beat up on your current situation, but you have this information now. You're gathering this information, so use it. Okay, the next guy that you're with, if you're a woman, I mean, give him that extra little bit of grace. And if you're a guy and you're dealing with this issue from your father, okay, give your father grace. Okay, forgive him, whether or not you've ever met him in person or not. Forgive him. Okay,
Mm.
you need to work on a place of forgiveness, and that's going to bring us to our next slide. Okay, we're all broken. Okay, almost everybody's broken. I had my father in my life, but I still have a lot of broken issues. Okay, and we need to recognize that we're broken. We need to stop acting all high and mighty and acting like, oh, well, this doesn't matter. Now, I mean, if you're in front of people at your job, you can be as strong as you need to be. But among this group and among people at your church or wherever, it's okay to not act like you know everything. Because in my belief system, nobody can replace the absence of your father. I just don't see it. I've never seen where it has been there. Now it's different if you have a stepfather, okay, because that was different because that's just the father you knew growing up. But what I'm talking about is just 100%. There was zero male figure there for your primary years of 0 to 15. If that guy has not been there and there was nobody there, then there's just a missing place in your heart, and that's just what it's going to be. But it doesn't mean that you can't be a whole person and that you cannot, um, stand in the gap, like I said, for your children or for your grandchildren. So one of the things that I would encourage is to work through the pain. Don't dismiss it. Therapy, counseling, friends, whatever is burning you in your heart or bothering you, you need to try to work it out or to understand it or to give, some kind of focus to it. Remember to focus on God's word, his laws, and his ways. I mean, everybody in this group is Christian, or at least most of y'all are. So I think that you can lean on God's word because one of the things I found is a lot of times we don't like what God has to say. But if we're honest, his word almost always ends up reigning true. We might figure it out, 5 years later after an event, but it almost always reigns true. And then we almost always are guilty and feel bad by not just paying attention and listening to him. Okay. And like I say, number 4 is what I said in the last slide, be willing to stand in the gap. The hardest thing you can do many times is stand in the gap. That is the hardest thing because you have both sides pulling on you. You got friends pulling on you. You got, family pulling on you. And then you're basically saying, no, no, I'm going to stand here because I want my children to have a different view. I want my grandchildren to have a different view. Because like I say, some of y'all are at the point where it would be your grandchildren, but you can do your best to try to work with them. And if you need to educate yourself, there's a lot of marriage books out there, parenting books. Right before, internet went dead, we were talking about maybe even having a topic of how to be married. And I agree that that might be a really great topic, especially based off of, what we're saying today. Because a lot of people don't understand what marriage is really like. And marriage is a beautiful thing. Like I said, I mean, I'm divorced, but I would love to be married again. Um, I think it's crazy when you're allowed it to be crazy. But I think that it's all about, again, having some kind of understanding. So I do think that that's a great topic. I would say if you did not have that father figure, you might want to be cautious and err on the side of caution. It's better to be a little prudent than to put yourself out there to be hurt and or misused. Everything else is pretty much self-explanatory, but I will say that you have to understand that your perspective generally is skewed when you don't have that, because you cannot replace 15 years every single day of watching and observing two people trying to work through life. You can't do it. It's nothing you all can do to ever fix that. That is just something that just has to happen. I mean, you can give it to somebody on a TV show, you can give it through a book, but you need to. I think people need to recognize that their perspective gets skewed when they just don't have that, because they don't know what to look for. They don't know what's normal. It's almost like, as crazy as it sounds. I remember watching this thing where it was these women asking the question, why do men spread their legs when they sit down? you know, and it seems so obvious to most people, but for women, these particular women who hadn't been around men, they in their mind they just didn't put two and two together. So that's pretty much it today. I didn't, like I said, I didn't want to get into the weeds because I think that this is something that's more about healing than it is about getting too deep in the weeds. But I wanted us to have an understanding of these types of things and what's going on, and honestly, what's at stake. Because we have to remember that you're not just you. You're not fighting for just you. Okay, I'm not just fighting for Jay. I'm fighting for Jay's children's 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 children. And what I do today will affect, anybody that comes from me 100 years from now. Okay, it's not just about me. And even when you start to deal with Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, and we want to talk about those types of people, everybody in that group was important. Everybody all the way down. One of the main reasons why we study Ruth is because Ruth gave Boaz a child. Okay, y'all need to think about this. Ruth gave Boaz a child. That child is in the lineage of Jesus. Okay, it was Ruth's decision to marry this guy Boaz, and there had to be some reason why no woman would talk to Boaz, but she was willing to do so based off of Naomi's recommendation, and that put her in the lineage. Her blood was inside Jesus. So what she did, how she stood in the gap, literally affected history. So we have to remember this standing in the gap, this caring. And the reason why I keep saying that is because, we all have to think, okay, how can we learn to get along better with these people, and or how can we forgive our father? How can we forgive sometimes our mother? How can we forgive our uncle or whoever it was that hurt us? Because if you carry that pain and you continue with that pain, then children are going to look at that pain and they're going to learn from that pain. And what we don't want them to do is to learn from that pain and then go out and imitate that pain and then pass that pain to the next generation. So that's it for my presentation today.